Hello, I'm Malta, and I've been doing these videos for a couple of years, and occasionally I do these little stories just to sort of pad out the videos, and sort of anecdotal stories about things that happened to me when I was a child in the antiques business, because my father was an antiques dealer in England. He's still alive, still does it a bit now. I'll just do another little story. So one of my favourite stories is about a lady who used to buy her bread from Harrods every day, but she didn't live in London, she lived in Warwickshire. So that's the basis of the story. So I'm going to go back a bit further. So in the Second World War in Warwickshire, which is very close to Coventry, the government pretty quickly found that one of the things they needed the most were water pumps and fire hoses, portable ones. They didn't want ones on the back of a wagon. They didn't want big ones that were too heavy to move. They wanted portable hoses and pumps they could carry around to put out the fire in the Blitz. So obviously Coventry was bombed, and also Birmingham was bombed just up the road from Warwick. And when the planes left the cities that were doing the bombing, they would empty the remaining cargo on the way back. So you get the big Blitz in Coventry, in Birmingham, London, of course, Plymouth, Southampton, Portsmouth, and other places. On the way home, they would pick out lights and get rid of all the leftover bombs. So you'd have huge factories burnt out in Coventry, as you'd expect, and then you'd have oddment bombing in irrelevant places all the way back to the coast. So in Coventry, there were lots of automotive factories and engineering factories. They made aeroplanes and bits and bobs and stuff for marine engines and all sorts of things. So they have all these factories in Coventry, particularly Coventry and Birmingham. And there was one person who lived in Warwick, where I'm from, who had an engineering factory that made water pumps. Basically what happened is, when the war started, the government went to the factory, knocked on the door and said, "Do you make water pumps?" He said, "Yes, I make 12 a week." And the government said to him, "You need to make 2,000 a week. You can have all the factories in the road, you can have all the men in the road, you can have anything you want, we'll bring it to you. You've got to make more pumps. We need the pumps. We need the pumps for London, we need the pumps for the colonies, we need the pumps for the ships, we need the pumps for the airports, we need the pumps for hospitals, schools, the railway stations." And this man wasn't requisitioned, his factory wasn't requisitioned, that wasn't the way it worked. He was supported, and his production was ramped up. But because it wasn't requisition, and it was a private company, and he was an engineer, and he was in a reserved occupation, he made a fortune, and we're talking a fortune. So after the war, this gentleman had bought a house in Switzerland, Jersey, Malta, south of France, a couple in England, one in London, and he'd filled all the houses with some fantastic stuff. And some of the stuff had bought off my father, some of the minor stuff. But he lived in the town where my father had his shop, a minor secondary town, Warwick. So he died, and he said in his will, "Can you please let Michael buy back some of the things he sold us and involve him in the dispersal?" And the son took the will, and he didn't do exactly what the father wanted. He got Sotheby's and Christie's in from London, and they pulled out all the best bits. I would do the same, so it's not a problem. And the residue in the houses, most of the houses, was left up for my father to buy, and he bought some of the stuff he'd sold him in the first place, the old man, and he bought the residue. And the residue included some fantastic stuff, because even in those days, Christie's and Sotheby's were fussy, but then they were even more fussy. And there was so much stuff. There was silver, there was diamonds, pictures, there were lawnmowers, there were linens, pots and pans, deck chairs, all sorts of stuff. So my father bought this stuff, and it was in the local Warwick house. The old man's wife was still alive, and the son had the task of selling the house and the contents while she was still alive. It was too big for her, and it wasn't safe for her. It was cold, and she was lonely, but she didn't really want to sell it. So this transition from the death of the old man to the old lady dying was about 5 years. And the son sold the contents of the house. And it was a big house with 10 bedrooms, a ballroom, a lake, an in and out drive, a gatehouse, stables, staff quarters, guest quarters, a cellar. There was no chapel because it wasn't a Catholic house. So it was a beautiful house. And I was allowed to go to the house with my father when he went to see the son and the lady, but I was never allowed out of the car. I was always told to sit in the car. So the story is about the bread. The lady who owned the house, the old lady of the very rich, successful engineer, had become accustomed to having a loaf of bread from Harrods every day, whether she was in London or in Warwickshire. And in those days in Warwickshire, there was no motorway from Warwickshire to London. It would take a van 3 to 5 hours to drive up an A road one way from London to this house in Warwickshire. And she had a standing order for a loaf of bread every day from Harrods, one loaf of bread. And they would drive a loaf of bread from Harrods to this house in Warwickshire for 7 o'clock, or whatever it was, 8 o'clock. And she would hear the gravel in the long sweeping drive. So she'd hear this sweep, lovely sound of crunching gravel. And she'd hear the man get out of the door, slam it, and bring into the scullery kitchen a loaf of bread. And he would be given, obviously, he'd go to the toilet and he'd have a cup of coffee and a nutter. The old lady would go down and have a nutter and get the bread and have her toast. The funny thing about the story, I mean the whole story is funny, but the funniest thing about the story is that if the van broke down or was delayed, or they forgot to bring it, she wouldn't get out of bed. So it's a bit like the Queen with the bagpipes, who got used to only getting up when she heard the bagpipes. So it's just a story about a peculiar situation, a situation of extreme wealth leading to peculiarity and eccentricity. Thank you.